National Treasure himself, Nick Aldis. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing well, gents. Thank you for having me.
Thank
Pleasure
you for
to have
joining
you.
us. Absolutely.
So let's just get started with the kind of obvious question. How did you get into wrestling, and why? Obviously, you were a bodybuilder and worked with other sports prior to wrestling. What made you kind of want to do the transition into professional wrestling?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it was a transition. I think I had my sights set on wrestling. I think from about the age of about 13 or 14. I think, truthfully, it was 2000 was like the year where I sort of switched from being just a fan to sort of looking at it like, I think I want to do this. Then you probably remember that it was the year that Channel 4 got all the WWF stuff, and so I was buzzing because we didn't have Sky when I was growing up, so I always had to get my mates to tape it.
Same.
So it was nice it was so cool to finally have like Sunday Night Heat. Wow, and then like randomly they'd have like the pay-per-views, like they had the Royal Rumble and
I think they had
like
Backlash one year, maybe.
Yeah, Backlash was awesome. Like, and Backlash 2000 was such a great pay-per-view. It was such a good show. Like top to bottom was just a mental card, and it had Rock and Hunter on last, and they tore the house down. And I remember that was the match for me. That was the one where I sort of went, I didn't articulate it to that level at the time, but later on I started to think that was the one for me, because I started realizing I sort of like this Triple H as much as I like The Rock. And because I started sort of just thinking, I know he's a bad guy, and I know that, he cheats, and I know that he's got the McMahons helping him, but God, like, he's cool. I want to, and I was sort of started, emulating him and thinking, man, there's something about him. And I started feeling that way about I felt that way about Rock when Rock was a heel too. Like, I remember sort of preferring Rock to Austin when they feuded the year before, like WrestleMania 15. It was, that's it. I love Rock and Austin for WrestleMania 15. I know a lot of people kind of go, oh, all they did was brawl and stuff, but I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. But I did remember thinking, I was a little bit irritated that everybody was cheering for Austin so much, because I thought Rock's so cool, but I suppose because I was a defiant teenager, I was sort of like, I think I'd rather be the person, I was more likely to be the person with silly catchphrases and, sort of doing that than I was to be because I wasn't a fighter. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't a street tough kind of kid. Although I grew up in an area where there was a lot of street fighting. There was a lot of, in Kings Lynn, there was a lot of fights, and there was like a fight culture, but I wasn't really part of it. So I don't know, but yeah, around 2000, 2001, by the time I got to 2002, I was firmly, like, I was lifting weights every day. I sort of lost interest in sports for the most part. And I just sort of started, I didn't really know how I was going to do it, but I just started working toward the idea that I'm going to figure out how to be a pro wrestler. And I know it might seem a foreign concept today, but that's why I started bodybuilding. Like, that's why I started lifting weights, because when I was, 12, 13, 14, whatever it was, like I said, strange though it may seem today, my first thought was, if I wanted to be a pro wrestler, I better start lifting weights.
It's a body game.
Yeah, right. It's a upper body business, but yeah, it all tied together. It was all sort of fueled by, like, I developed an equal passion for working out and fitness and nutrition and bodybuilding and everything like that. That grew parallel with my love for the business.
Okay, cool. So you just mentioned Triple H and the Rockers, two people you kind of gravitated towards and drew influence from. Were there any other like people within wrestling you drew influence from, and also from like outside of wrestling as well?
Well, Brett was my guy, like 100%. As a kid, it's a testament to the quality of WWF's marketing. But even when I couldn't watch it all the time, like, I knew who everybody was. So I had the annuals, we had the computer games, we had all that stuff. And I remember, you know, I understood that Hulk Hogan was the main man, right? Like I understood that Hulk Hogan was a celebrity. And I think I even understood on some level that he was a celebrity beyond wrestling. Like I sort of understood that he was a sort of household name. But and this is not a knock on the Hulkster, and I've got to know Hulk over the years and worked with him and everything. And obviously anyone who's in the business owes him a huge debt of gratitude. But when I was a kid, I didn't really think of him as cool. You know, like Brett was cool. Like I remember thinking like Brett was someone who you weren't sort of embarrassed to be a fan of Bret the Hitman Hart, right? Like he was good looking and he had the leather jacket and the, you know, the long hair and the sunglasses and the cool music and the cool gear, and girls liked him. And and the way he approached wrestling, he wasn't, hey, look at me, you know, sort of, he was cool, right? Like, and I think one of the things that drives me crazy is when people try to knock Bret for like a lack of charisma, which I just think is a complete bullshit criticism, because like, okay, he'd probably be the first one to tell you that his verbal skills were not the best in the business. Like his promo, he certainly wasn't the best promo, but he had bags of charisma. He just had a different type of charisma than a lot of the other guys. And I think that's why he resonated better with Brits. And I think that's why he resonated with Europeans and people all over the world rather than just Americans. Because number one, he wasn't waving an American flag around all the time. Right. Which, like, it's so amazing to me that it's like trying to explain. Like, I've had this conversation with Americans so many times. You know, I've lived in America now for, like going on like 12 to 13 years. And to this day, I still have this conversation, and I have to explain to people, like, you do understand that, you know, when a guy's whole gimmick is based around like being a patriotic American, that sort of alienates him from everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, especially during different times when, you know, the US is involved in stuff that some of the world are not particularly happy about. Like, it's, you know, not everybody agrees with you all the time. And that was why Bret, like, this will turn into a Bret Hart love fest, but like,
that's fine.
I don't think people appreciate how important Bret Hart was to the survival of the WWF in the 1990s. Like, I think that they had scaled to a point. Their scale of operation was so big after the boom they'd had in the 1980s, and it dropped off so significantly in the 1990s that they would have been in real trouble if they hadn't have been able to continue to do big business internationally. And that was because of Bret and Undertaker.
Yeah, 100%. His heel work in 97's what kind of like got me really hooked into wrestling as well.
Oh,
like
it was incredible. It was incredible.
Yeah, unreal talent. So good. You just this isn't actually in my notes. I saw this on Twitter the other day. You won the Stu Hart championship, didn't you, as well?
Yeah.
And Bret was in attendance. What was that like for you? Was that a bit of a kind of like surreal moment?
Yes, I mean, obviously, in terms of in comparison to some of the other things I've done in my career, like, it's not the same level of scale, right? Like, but it's on a personal level, it's up there with the most important things I've done. So Bret had been a bit of a unicorn to me. Like, I'd been around a lot of things that he was at, but I'd never actually got to meet him. I'd always been like, if he was at WrestleCon, like, he's so popular that he's sequestered in his own room and stuff like that. And so I had never had the chance to actually really get to meet him and talk to him. And I never wanted to do it in an environment where there was going to be a load of people around, or, you know, it was going to have to be very quick and sort of ushered in and out, like, oh, okay, well, it was very nice to meet you. Okay, bye. So, and then at the, I was at the Flair show, Ric Flair's last match in Nashville. And I was just doing commentary on the show. So it was like a no stress sort of day, really. I was just sort of chilling out. And then I found out that Bret was there, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I can actually get a chance to go up to him in a sort of private setting where there's no one, it's just the boys, you know, or just people backstage and all that. So I got a chance to go meet Brett, and I walked up to him, and he was sitting with the Nasty Boys. And I'm good. I'm friends with the Nasty Boys. I've known them. They've always been cool to me. So I kind of politely kind of wait for a dip in conversation, and, you know, walk up and shake his hand and sort of tell him, like, you know, my name's Nick Aldis. I've you know, a pro wrestler, and I've been a huge fan of yours for so many years, and you're one of the main reasons I got into the business, and I try to emulate you, and, you know, blah blah blah. I'm like gushing, my verbal diarrhea. And then the Nasty Boys are like, "Oh, Brett, yeah, have you ever seen this kid work? Oh, you ought to see this guy. He's really great. You'd love him. You know, he's a great wrestler." And right? It was nice of them. And you know, we have a nice little conversation for a couple of minutes, and then I kind of bounce and whatever. And then later on, someone came and someone said, "Hey, Brett's looking for you." So I go back and find Brett and whatever. And he's like, "Hey, my son Dallas is promoting up in Calgary. You know, we're sort of doing this, you know, we're sort of not rekindling, but, you know, sort of doing like a version of sort of a Stampede style thing. It's dungeon wrestling, and we're doing it, and we got a show in Calgary, and, you know, Harry's our heavyweight champion, and you'd be a perfect opponent for Harry. Would you be up for coming up?" And I was like, "Fuck, of course I would," you know. And it all sort of went from there. And then we were on an event in Cardiff that piggybacked off the stadium show. And he got a chance. That's when I really got a chance to spend some time with him. So it worked out well, because I hadn't had a chance to really spend any time with him. And then he called me to, you know, he got my number and called me, which that was surreal in itself, because I got this phone call and I didn't know who it was. So I let it go to voicemail, and then it was like, "Hey, Nick, it's Bret Hart," you know, and I'm like, "Oh shit." So yeah. And then I got a chance, like I said, I got a chance to spend some time with him in Cardiff over that weekend. And I just got back from my Canadian trip this weekend. I had Calgary on Saturday, and then Winnipeg on Sunday. But I went up a day early. I went up to Brett's house, and, you know, sat with him, and, you know, and all that. And then it ended up transpiring that I ended up winning the title that is named after his father. So, you know, it means a lot that Brett would, you know, almost sight unseen. I don't know if he's watched any of my matches or not, or anything like that, but just based on sort of reputation and trust, he sort of, "Hey, you know, let's make him the champion." So from a gratification standpoint, you know, up there with the biggest honors I've ever had. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's like a bucket list thing for you. Like, you know, one of those things when you first came into wrestling, you were starting out, you say you idolized and looked up to him. Was that one of those, one day I need to meet him, or, you know, that's something I need to tick off?
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have predicted it would be in that, you know, scenario necessarily, but I'm very glad that it was. And then the show was, me and Harry had a great match. Like, the Victoria Pavilion is it's such a perfect wrestling venue. Like, it's this, you know, you can see why Stampede, you can see why and I just watched the Tales from the Territories episode on Stampede. It came out the same week. And one of the guys on there, I think it was Abdullah, or it was Abdullah or Dave Schultz, one of the two. One of them said, like, everybody who came through Calgary, even after they went other places, they still talked about Calgary with this sort of, you know, with this sort of real fondness. And I can see why, because the pavilion, like, we probably had it like half full, but it was rocking. Like, the atmosphere was great. And, like, Harry comes out with Davey Boy's music, and he has a bulldog, and, you know, I've got tons of heat. Like, I've gone out and cut a heel promo and got everybody, got them right where I want them. And it's like the Hart family are there, and Diana is there, and, you know, it's Harry in the main event, and he's got a bulldog with him, and Brett's sitting at ringside. It's like the place was rocking. And I just remember being like, this is pro wrestling. Like, this is what I live for, you know, to be in the thick of it in a moment like this, where it's like I'm in control of the situation and I've got these people right where I want them,
but also incredibly surreal as well. I can imagine.
Yeah.
You're saying being at that point, being, lucky enough to be invited up there and asked to go on there and having your idol in the crowd watching you do what you do.
I yes and no, but also in the sense, like, I've been doing this a long time, so you have to have it. And this isn't coming from a place of arrogance. This is just sort of coming from a place of sort of professional duty. But I sort of, once I was there, I was sort of like, all right, like I'm in control. Like I'm gonna go out and I know I can have a good match, I know I can close the show. So it wasn't like I was sitting there going, oh, where's Brett? Like I knew he was there somewhere.
You got to put your business hat on though.
Yeah,
separate those two worlds.
Same thing as when I defended the title in Missouri and Harley was there. Like, very similar situation. Like Harley had wanted nothing to do with the NWA because it had been such a joke, previously. And then one, because obviously I went to his camp, and two, because of the quality of the content that Dave Lagana and I had been putting out, like in terms of like with the 10 pounds of gold series and the early, that stuff, all the stuff I did with Cody, and just I took the belt to China and was the first guy first ever NWA champion to defend it in China. And I'd been to Australia, Puerto Rico, Canada, all over the US, England. So I think Harley saw that as like, good for him, that's more like it, right?
Bringing that level of prestige back to it, I guess.
That's more like it. Like it's, and so then when Harley reached out and wanted to, very similar sort of situation, like, hey, I've got this little regional, independent, and like, can you come in and work with Leland and, and in a title match or whatever. Very similar situation, but it was like, and I actually, as it happened, not that it's necessarily a bragging right, I guess, but it's certainly significant. But me and Harley sat down and did like a taped interview, and it ended up being the last interview he ever did on camera.
Oh wow!
It was only afterwards where, like, because Harley was in a wheelchair by then. He was in like a motorized wheelchair. And he came out and he had like one of his old ring jackets on or whatever. And I guess because again, same thing as what being in once I'm in work mode, I'm in work mode. Like I didn't even know, but he was really close to the entranceway, and I just blew right past him when I came out for my entrance. Which was the right thing to do. And like it wasn't. It was only like afterwards, like someone said, you just marched right past Harley Race, but. See, that's the difference. I think is that, like, because Harley Race, he would understand that. He'd go, well, yeah, like I would have done the same thing. Like Harley Race wouldn't have stopped if Harley Race was a heel and defending the title, and he was in someone else's hometown, and then he wouldn't have stopped to like shake Lou Thesz's hand, right? Like if the other guy was Lou Thesz's son, do you know what I mean? Like he would have just headed straight to like all business. So I think, and not that I didn't even really do it deliberately. It wasn't a sort of conscious decision on my part. It was just once I'm on sort of thing.
I imagine you've got some incredible stories about Harley. He seems like such an amazing character.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I met him and spent time with him, he was obviously, a much more calm and much older and much more calm and sort of reserved. But he told me a lot of stories. It was fun going. He took me to his office and showed me all kinds of really cool sort of memorabilia, like just sort of clippings, and showed me some checks, like some checks from like the 70s and the early 80s and stuff, and and just stuff from Japan and like stuff with him and Andre and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, just a different breed of guy in the wrestling business, Harley Race.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he fascinates me. So you mentioned the NWA Worlds Champion ship there, you really kind of helped rehab the image of that belt. Obviously with the 10 pounds of gold series, and then, as you said, the match with Cody. How did the match with Cody come about? And also, like, with the kind of like sort of pressure of being that champion, what were like the sort of biggest challenges in making it what it is today?
Well, the Cody thing, Cody really initiated it. I think when I'm trying to remember now, the first I knew about it was I was defending the title pretty much every weekend somewhere, and Dave Lagana most of the time was coming with me to document it, because that's like what people don't understand is that, like, my first year and a bit with the NWA is the NWA didn't pay me any money. Like, all my money came from the promoters that I was working for. So all those 10 pounds of goals and everything, I wasn't technically really getting paid for those. Like, that was something we were doing to continue to, it was a sort of symbiotic thing, because I was, that was starting to gain momentum, which was then getting me more bookings, which was helping. So one hand, washes the other, right? And then increasing over time, right? There were, it's funny. I don't have a definitive list, but there's quite a few who, within a few months of me wrestling them in a title match, got signed somewhere. So it was like Jonah Rock, and then he in Australia, he ends up, and then he goes to NXT as Bronson Reed. Robbie Eagles in Australia, and then he gets signed by New Japan. And there were others, and I can't remember them now. But there was this sort of, so it really was a sort of this concept of, like, I'm being pitted against like the best independent guys, and it was similar. I guess it was similar in that respect to what Cody had done when he had his list. Like, he finished at WWE and he kind of put this list out, which was a very smart marketing thing on his part. He's very smart. And so I don't know if that's what caught his eye, or whether, maybe it was part of that, and maybe obviously it was the belt itself because of the obvious relevance to him and Dusty and everything. And, because I certainly didn't know him and he didn't know me. But I'm sure that he appreciated the way that I was doing it. And then just out of the blue, Lagana one day said to me, I think Cody Rhodes wants a title match with you. And I'm like, what makes you say that? He's like, he was texting me, like, just asking questions about you, like asking about this, and like, what's he, is he easy to work with? And like, how's he, how's this, how's that? What are you guys' plans? It was like he was sniffing around. And so I just said, tell him to give me a call. Like, let's work something out. Let's do some business. And again, sort of old school like that. I knew he would appreciate that, and I knew he would understand what I meant. And then we just sort of set it up, and he sort of smartened me up. Like, we've got this idea for this. We want to do this big show in Chicago, and they were hot. They were red hot. So, you have to remember, like, I'm very honest, even when I'm, maybe to a fault, but I'm very self-aware, or at least I try to be. When I first started doing the NWA stuff, I was ice fucking cold. You know what I mean? Like, I was coming off of a TNA run, which I thought was pretty good, except like, had been sort of minimized in the last sort of 6 months or so. But I'd worked my way through that entire promotion, become world champion there, worked with all kinds of big name guys, carried the show, maintained ratings, house shows, everything like that when I was on top. I really thought that I would come out the other side of it with, at least with some sort of market value. And I was fucking dead. I was cold. Like, I had nothing, and it was just, the business had TNA had this stigma, it had this weird sort of stigma about it. So it was almost like it was a hindrance more than a help. So I sort of had to really start from scratch. Like, and that's when that was one of the things I thought caught people's attention with what we were doing with the NWA, with the 10 pounds of gold and everything, was that I was very honest about it. Like, we went, hey, here's this guy, Tim Storm, who's the most likable human being you'll ever meet. He's a school teacher. You know, he's not a big star. He's not even a full-time wrestler. But it means a lot to him to be the world champion, you know, warts and all, right? And so suddenly people were sort of going, oh, wait, like keyboard warriors who are sitting there getting ready to go, man, he's just a school teacher. They can't do that now.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've gone, well, they've just been fucking honest and they've just said that. And then if they're getting ready to go, oh, he hadn't done shit since he left TNA. I said that too. I go, yeah, man, it didn't work out the way I thought. And suddenly everyone goes, oh, is this real? And it's like, yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah.
And Lagana and I, when we were making that show, if there was ever a discussion about, should we talk about this or should we cover this or whatever, my number one rule was always, it feels real when it is real. So let's not manufacture anything. Mm-hmm. There's no need.
Yeah.
Right. When you have, and this is just my philosophy for booking in the modern era, right? And I know I'm going off on a mad tangent here, but stick with me. Like, booking in the modern era, you've got to understand, the most important element of booking, in my opinion, is you have to understand your audience. And if you understand that your audience, because I'm one of them, if you have to understand that your audience is desperate to know the real story, they're desperate to know the truth about everything that's going on, how about you just fucking start there?
Easy. It's on a plate.
Right? There's enough we are pretty interesting people. Like Cody, you know, one of the things I think that made the rivalry with Cody and I so successful is that he's a really fascinating guy. Mm-hmm. Like, he's a very unusual guy, and I mean that with love and respect. Like, and I don't think that people really got to see a lot of that until then. And then people start going, you know, there's a lot more going on under the surface than meets the eye. Mm-hmm. And I think the same with me, you know, with me, it's like, oh, 6'4", you know, good body, good looking. Okay. Yeah. He's with Mickey James, and Dixie Carter liked him a lot. And so everyone just assumes that they've got you all figured out. You know, they just assume that, he's done everything handed to him. He didn't have to work. He ain't paid any dues. You know, they don't know that I worked on the camps and had to wrestle like every day and take the ring down, put the ring up, sometimes wrestle twice. Mm-hmm. Had to cram in the back, me and Tom, with all the merchandise stuffed on top of us and all that. You know, they don't know any of that stuff, right? But over time, once they start to understand who you really are, now they start to go, they're not trying to work me. They're not trying to pull the wool over my eyes. That's when they get worked. Because, and I mean that in the best possible way, like something, again, it's a point of pride with fans who really love the business and really take it seriously, is that somehow along the way, they're determined to not get worked. Right? Like, you're not going to work me. And it's like, well, isn't that what you want though?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, don't you see it? Deep down, me and Cody had this conversation a lot. Yeah. Deep down, they just want to be taken on a ride.
Yeah.
Deep down, they just want to suspend their disbelief. They just have a much higher threshold for disbelief than the average fan, because they know what's really going on. So you go, okay, here's what's really going on. And then they go, oh my God, you know,
I don't know as much as I thought. Like,
well, they go, oh my God, that's true. Like, you know, I'm not saying this is, and you've got to know how to do it right, because and I don't mean to, and I certainly don't want to get clickbaited to hell out of this, but you know, you've got to be careful with that approach, because because if you work with someone who doesn't know how to do it right or is selfish, they work themselves into a shoot.
Yeah.
and then you end up with problems like ones that we may have seen in certain places, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have a sort of, that's how the guys worked in the territory days. They understood, everyone worked with the same sort of criteria, like, let's try to keep it as realistic as possible, but let's also build each other up. Let's boost each other's credibility. Let's not point out obvious low-hanging fruit, like, I'm bigger than you, you know, or like, oh, you're not as rich as me, you know, or whatever. Like, let's not do stuff that diminishes, you know, the other's market value. Let's build this anticipation to the showdown, right? Me and Cody, when we did our match, the first one and the second one,
I always likened the build that Cody and I did to what I call like gunslingers, like the gunslingers in a Western.
Yeah.
Like that, because it wasn't a heat driven angle. We weren't, you know, I hate you, you know, I hate your guts, I want to like end your career, you know, da da da. Like, you got to be really careful with that, like that, because if it's not believable, then immediately people just switch off and they go, okay, manufactured. And I don't know, I felt like there had been so much of that, or there'd either been a bit sort of two ends of the spectrum. We either had angles that were like way too over the top in terms of the emotional thing, or it was like dream match booking, like, oh my God, this wrestler who does loads of cool moves is going to wrestle this other wrestler who does loads of cool moves. Oh my God, it's a dream match, you know? And it's sort of like, okay, but then what? You know, where's the emotional investment? With Cody and I, it was sort of like this different, it was like it was one of those things, it became this thing, like not a match that nobody knew they wanted until it got booked, you know? And I always thought that it was really came down to the level of effort that we put in. Like, Ring of Honor had a show in London, and they did the Crystal Palace Arena. It was really great. It was the same venue that New Japan just did.
Yeah.
It was a really, really great venue.
Yeah, it's really good. I was there for it. Superb.
I went all the way there just to do a promo. Like, we flew there, and it was like Cody had a match with someone, and then I came out unannounced. You know, and that's where we did the agree, like we shook hands and agreed, okay, fine, I'm all in. And I think it, like, and I remember like we left that day and we drove up to my parents' house. And by the time we got up to Norfolk, you know, 3 hours late or whatever, it was like, oh, everyone on, you know, on social media is just like, they've lost their minds about this. And I think it was just the level of effort, you know, because it was, when had anyone gone to that level of effort for an independent show? You know what I mean? It was like, when had an angle between two guys, a rivalry, a one match been built with that amount of effort, like for one night, that wasn't funded by a multi-million or billion-dollar company, you know? And it just sort of, I think that was the thing that just got, you know, it was just little things like that started to get the ball rolling. And then after that, it was just a case of, all right, let's just keep it going. And like I said, we had such a mutual understanding that he needed me and I needed him. Like he needed a big moment, right? Like he needed a big win, a big moment, a big sort of crowning achievement to prove to WWE that he could be that guy. And I needed a chance to, essentially the same thing. I needed a chance to be in a main event angle where it wasn't like, oh, he's getting the rub from Jeff Hardy, or he's getting the rub from Sting or Kurt Angle or something. And this is not a knock on Cody, because Cody was still a bigger name than I was, but it was like we're the same age, or, you know, similar age and similar, you know what I mean? And it was like the first time I got a chance to really strut my stuff with a peer rather than being sort of handed an opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, so I always look back on it fondly, and Cody and I even texted about it after his WrestleMania, you know, when he showed up at WrestleMania, because you know, he was very gracious about that, and you know, thanked me again for doing business in Chicago and everything, because it was like because he knew how much it meant, like it helped a lot, and all of that angle really helped build my credibility and value, which I then used to sort of essentially build the NWA with, you know. So it was like, people in wrestling throw this, like, people love to talk about a great match or a 5-star match or how many stars did this get and all this kind of thing. And I don't, you know, and look, if you care about that, cool. That's, you know what I mean? That's up to you. Like, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, it's stupid, whatever. But the most satisfying thing you can do in wrestling is what we call a good piece of business. Right? When you have a segment and you come back and you go, oh, everyone's buzzing, you know, or you have a match and you go, man, did you hit, like, we built them and built them and built them, and then we took it home just at the right time and the place was rocking, whatever. But, you know, ultimately what you want to do is a good piece of business, meaning, like, by the time you're finished, everybody's value has increased. You know, everybody who came in, like, everybody came out the other end stronger, right? It wasn't like, you know, people who looked at it on the surface, and I saw a lot of people would make this comment like, oh, Cody booked that show and he booked himself to win, right? And it's like, you don't get it. Like, there was no other finish to do in that moment. You know, we never even discussed it. Like, we just knew what the best piece of business was. Like, it's you know, there's nothing I would change about that match, and there's nothing I'd change about the return either. You know, and the only thing I would change would be if we could have got the rubber match, but who's to say that we still couldn't?
Absolutely.
Hope so.
I remember I actually rewatched the All In match this morning. It really felt like, as you said about the build, it really felt like a big fight, like, feel with the, like, the presentation, the entrances, like, obviously Cody coming down with his corner men, you coming down with yours. It was just really well presented. I think, like, going back and looking at it, it was something I maybe didn't appreciate as much at the time, and then going back, going, wow, that was really well done.
I mean, look, there's very few things in wrestling that can top, like, a full building standing and screaming, giving you a standing ovation at the bell. You know, that's one of those rare, and it's like, it's one thing to do it when you're two giant stars, right? Like, obviously, that I'd say the best example of that would be Rock and Hogan, right?
100%.
It's one of the most incredible moments, you know, that minute, that 2 minutes, whatever it is, you know, it's one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. But Cody and I had our own version of it. It was 11,000 people. It wasn't 68,000, but it was like, I thought, for me, the thing that was so gratifying about it was that, like, we didn't have TV. We didn't have a national television show to build this with. We did it on YouTube. Like, we did it with cell phones and and, you know, we did it with, you know, it was a real testament to our creativity, and we had no writers and no, you know, there wasn't some czar sitting there going, here's what's going to happen. Like, it was all a sort of mutually beneficial sort of agreement, and it was all done organically along the way between us, because we knew what we needed to accomplish out of it. We trusted each other, and it's just, I wish more wrestling was like that, I guess.
Amen. Absolutely agree.
I know we've gone off on a huge tangent here, so you
not
probably messed up your notes.
No,
that's all right. I kind of, like, I've been sort of picking them out from, like, where we've been going anyway. You did mention like, your TNA run during that. Early on in your career, you won the TNA Tag Team Championships and IWGP Heavyweight Tag titles with Doug Williams when you were in the British Invasion. How did that help you grow as a wrestler? Because Doug's, like, an incredible mind for the business, isn't he?
Well, Doug, it can't really be understated. Doug pretty much saved my TNA job, I think. Like I mean, I don't know if I would have been fired, but there's certainly a good chance, because I was so green. I showed up, I got given this awful gimmick. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know. I had no experience. I had a lot of experience for a guy my age in comparison to other guys my age, just given the fact that I'd wrestled probably about 200 days in my first year full time. But they were a very certain style of match. You know, it was the holiday camps mostly. So it was very sort of like, shall I break his arm, kids? Yeah, you know, sort of very, you know, it was, so I had an experience, but not the experience that I needed. And I just had no clue how to do like a 4-minute television match. And TNA was, you know, it was wild. You know, there was a lot of people there, and there was a structure, but there was still sort of these. Now, looking back on it now, I still think, how did nobody spot this? How did nobody, you know, have a sort of more quality control in place? You know, and it's times like that when you understand why WWE is the number one, because they just have it. Their system just does not allow for guys who are not ready, or guys who are, you know, it's their quality control is just so much stronger than anybody else's. And I was floundering with this terrible gimmick, and I was kind of the best I could. I was trying to see if there was some way I could not do this gimmick and do something else. And I don't know how it came up, but I just remember Terry Taylor coming to me and being like, "Good news, you don't have to do that gimmick anymore." And I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "We're bringing in Doug Williams, and we've got there's this big bodybuilder, Rob Terry, and we're going to put you guys together and make you the British Invasion." And I was just like, "Oh, thank God." You know, like, you know, Doug was so significant to me anyway, because Doug had come to Dropkicks Academy, which was one of the schools that I trained at. And he would come and help out whenever he wasn't working. And he'd rolled around on me a little bit and put in a word for me for a couple of places, and said, "There's this kid, he's very green, but he's got quite a decent build, and he's a good athlete, and he's, you know, whatever." And then he got me booked for John Fremantle, who used to still do the traditional shows in Rounds and all that down on the South Coast, Worthing, I think. And it was my second or third ever singles match, and it ended up being with Doug in a, you know, traditional Rounds match, whatever. And, you know, Doug obviously, like, you know, he could wrestle a broomstick, so he wrestled someone just slightly better than a broomstick at that time, and dragged him through, like, you know, 5 rounds or whatever, and even gave me a fall. And it helped, you know, and off the back of that, you know, I get some more bookings, and then a couple of different guys, including Doug, said, "You should talk to Brian Dixon. You should call Dixon. You're perfect for what he wants, you know, big sort of, you know, good looking baby face, whatever." So he had been a sort of, you know, whether he intended to or not, he had been a massive sort of advocate for me anyway. So it was cool to me, because I had obviously had the big break with Gladiators, and that was what led to me getting the opportunity with TNA. And Doug had some bookings with TNA, but they'd never pulled the trigger on like using him full time on television. So it was very, very rewarding to me that their desire to find something for me to do led to them finding something for him to do, and we complemented each other very well. Because the one thing I would say, even though they've still gotten a hell of a lot better over the years, like anything would with time, you got to put in your 10,000 hours. But the one thing I was always confident with was promos. Like, I never had a problem on the microphone. And and I think Doug would be the first one to tell you that at that point in 2009, you know, promos were not his strongest thing. So we just sort of had that understanding, like when it comes to the entertainment part of it, the backstage segments and the promos and stuff, I'll sort of carry most of the weight. And then when it comes to in the ring, he'll carry most of the load, and he'll hold my hand through it. And that's what happened. And I got a very good education from Doug and from Bobby Roode and from, you know, the Dudleys and Cowboy and Machine Guns and all, you know, all those guys. So it worked out very well for me.
Awesome. You touched on a couple of points there, which got down in the notes. So first of all, you spoke about the time, you know, All-Star and the typical kind of holiday camps and 200 plus matches a year. How was that transition from, you know, the British independent circuit, the holiday camp stuff, to going to the US scene? Like, how difficult or easy was that?
I found it very difficult. Just the pressure, you know, this, like, you know, Dixon, when I was, I think 2007, I think was the year that or maybe 06, whatever year it was, where I really was like pretty much worked for him and no one else. His business was incredible. Like, it became so commonplace to just go to a venue, like good quality venues too, like good, you know, 1,000-seat theaters and stuff, and for them to be packed, you know, every night. And but, you know, along with Butlins, and obviously Butlins was, you know, and even Butlins' business was good enough at one point where we had pyro and cheerleaders and stuff, you know. And but it was still very much sort of, you're on your own, right? You sort of, you know, you're working with, most of the time, unless it was in a tag or something, I was most likely working with one of about 4 or 5 guys that I'd worked with dozens and dozens of times. So, which is, you know, which is something I really miss about wrestling. Like, I miss the days of getting to wrestle the same guy over and over again, because that's when you really get to have fun and you get to like experiment with stuff, and you don't have to sit there and go, okay, what should we do? You know, like, what do you do? All right, let's figure it out. Like, when you can just sort of, a lot of the time you wouldn't even talk about it. You would just go out there and work, because you sort of knew what, you know, you had a rough idea of where you were going, and you just read each other's body language. Or in my case, I would just sort of let them lead, because they were always the veterans. Anyone who's worked on TV will tell you that just what I described is, you know, so far away from what wrestling on television is, especially when you're a new guy and you have very limited time. Like, I didn't know how to gobble someone up in 3 minutes. Like, I went out and had a match with Shark Boy. I love Sharky, right? He's a sweetheart. He's a great guy. But like, I think Road Dogg was the agent. It's not like he stood there and went, all right, you got to fucking eat his lunch, you know, gobble him up, right? Like, he was like, hey, win with your finish. Okay. So I go out and have, like, I'm the heel, so I'm feeding the baby face, because, like, that's what a heel does. Brits never, I just feel like Brits in general, like, never really had that much of a problem putting guys over. Like, it was never this thing of like, oh, I don't want to lose, you know, like we never had that. There was none of that culture in British wrestling, at least not when I was in it. So the idea that I would come and be, well, you know, I've got to look strong, I can't really sell for you either, I'm going to have to, you know, do this and win. Like, I just didn't do that. Well, that wasn't what they wanted, you know. So it's like, I have this sort of back and forth match, and, you know, shine up Sharky, and then I hit him with my finish and beat him. And I come back and, you know, Cornette's like, well, you sure gave him a lot, you know, like, and then Nash is like, the fuck you do that for? What the fuck you do that for? You know, you should have gobbled him up, you know. And I'm like, sorry, I don't know. Like, and also I'm 21, 22. I'm just trying not to have heat with anyone. Like, I can't be the one to say it. I can't go and say, oh, yeah, I better get all my shit in and pin you and beat you, you know. But it just was the sort of stuff I was talking about with TNA, where it was like, there was all the people in place, but sometimes you know, there wasn't the system, you know, there wasn't, like, no one wanted to be the bad guy. So stuff like that would happen where, you know, where someone would go, that wasn't what you were supposed to do. And well, no one told me, you know, and they're like, who was your agent? You know, and it would just sort of be like this, right? A lot of finger pointing. But more than anything, it was just the time thing. Like I remember just panicking so much. I'm sure that it must have reflected. I haven't gone back and watched a lot of this stuff. It's too painful. It's so bad. But like, I remember just freaking out because the referees would be like, okay, 4 minutes, you know, okay, 3.5, okay, 3 minutes, you know, and I'm like, you know, because I'd never had anyone ever give me time cues ever. And, you know, just a lot of that. And you know, you've got like the floor manager and she's like yelling stuff to you and she's holding up like, you know, and just, it's, you know, and they go hard camera. And then, you know, and
overwhelming.
Like, overwhelming. And, it's a skill, and obviously, you know, I adapted, and luckily I adapted relatively quickly. That was the one thing the one solace I could take was a lot of the guys, especially like the guys like Abyss and Bobby Roode, and you know, the sort of experienced guys who everybody respected and everybody's, you know, they would be the ones who would be like, man, you're picking this up quick. You know what I mean? Like they knew that I was thrown in at the deep end, and they would, you know, Abyss and other guys would say to me, man, you're really improving. Like, just, you know, stick with it, sort of thing. Like, you know, good shit. So
nice.
That's all it that's all it takes. Like, you know, and there was, not to say that there wasn't politics in TNA, but I don't think there was this sort of cutthroat mentality of like, oh, he's here to take my spot, you know, so fuck him. I'm not going to help him. It wasn't like that. It was, you know, they sort of understood like, hey, we're doing big business in the UK, and they want a UK guy who they can sort of hang their hat on, and this is the one they've chosen. So let's help him out. And you know, I'll always be grateful to that, because I understand that I had the profile coming off of Gladiators and everything, but in reality, it could have been anyone. So I always, you know, tried not to take that for granted.
Yeah. So one of the other things you got down here, and you've literally just mentioned it. So you were on the reboot, the UK reboot of Gladiators. How did that come about? And maybe talk a bit about your kind of time and experience doing that, because I remember watching the first iteration of that with John Fashanu and Eureka Johnson, and it was at the NEC in Birmingham, just down the road. And remember going to some of those and being absolutely enamored with it. Yeah. How was that for you? How did that all come about?
Well, it was a massive show. You know, it was in the 90s. I mean, everybody watched it. I remember watching it with, I mean, I had my favorites, and it sort of replaced wrestling in a lot of ways. Like on television, it's sort of, you know, because it sort of became the Saturday staple, didn't it?
Absolutely.
The sort of guilty pleasure for everyone. Like it was one of those things where, very much like wrestling, where people of a certain, you know, who consider themselves a bit too highbrow, they would of course say, oh, I don't watch it, but then of course they knew who everybody was, you know, very much like wrestling. Yeah, right. And it's like, you watch it. And so it came about, when I was working on the camps, there's I don't know if you guys remember the UK Pitbulls. So
absolutely.
They're good mates of mine. They're from Norfolk, so I used to travel with them quite a lot. So Mike and Dave, the Pitbulls, they were like, I would ride with them quite a lot. And because, you know, obviously Mike was, you know, 400 or 500 pounds, and Dave was a big strong man, and Dave at one point was even, like, I think, competing in like UK's Strongest Man and stuff. They were registered with a few different agencies for like, for sort of, you know, roles that they would fit, you know, like there used to be an agency in London called Uglies. I don't know if it still exists, but it was predominantly for like bouncers and, you know, boxers, wrestlers, like meathead sort of roles, or like unique looking people. And I think that Dave got a casting brief for this thing called the Thunderdome Games, which was at the Birmingham NEC. And it was a motorcycle, like it was like a live stunt show thing with like motocross bikes and stuff, and they would do like the Thunderdome and and this and that, whatever. And the role said, like this guy, his character called the Judge, and you're basically you're the ruler of this underground, Thunderdome ring or whatever. And it basically, in this brief, it says comfortable, like must be comfortable interacting with an audience off the cuff, would suit a pro wrestler, because they wanted a guy to have a big physical, to be in shape and have a sort of physical presence, but they also wanted him to have the ability to ad lib and and who better than a pro wrestler, right? Like those two attributes don't tend to lend themselves well to much else. Dave sent it to me and said, because they probably wouldn't get away with this now, but the casting brief also said tall, big, and then in brackets, not fat.
Dear.
So Dave sent it. You probably could get away with that now, but Dave sent it to me and went, "Well, that's me out." He went, "Here, you should go for this." So I did, and I got the gig, and like I think it was, I think it ran for 2 weeks. There was some big sort of motorcycle expo or something at the NEC, and they were doing this every night, and I loved it because this was more money than I'd ever made in my life. It was like $3,000 a week or something. I went, oh my God, I'm rich. And it was great. And it was it was nice to sort of take a bit of time off, and they put me up in a nice B&B and whatever. And I didn't have to drive, 5 or 6 hours every day or anything like that. So it was sort of, it was nice. And it was very easy. And the guy who wrote and directed and did the show was a guy called Carl. And after we were done, he said to me, "Hey, look, I have this talent agency. I deal mostly with stuntmen and stuff." He goes, "But every now and then stuff comes up for guys like you. Do you want me to put you on the books?" And I went, "Sure, yeah, whatever." Didn't hear anything from him, and I never really thought of it again. And then one day out of the blue, he called me and said, "Hey, 2 questions. Can you swim? And are you afraid of heights?" And I said, "Yes, I can. And no, I'm not." And he goes, "Great, because they're bringing Gladiators back. I got you an audition."
Wow.
And it just like that. And I just sort of went, "Oh shit. Okay." And he was like, "Yeah, it's going to be at Woolwich Barracks, like Army Barracks down in London. Here's the date, blah, blah, blah. Like, here's all the info, blah, 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 get down there." I went to the auditions, and the auditions for Gladiators was one of the funnest. It was like one of the coolest experiences of my life, doing just the auditions, because this is where wrestling really helped for two reasons. Because I've been wrestling every day, my cardio was on point. Mm-hmm. I was like, I was young. I was 20 then, so I was young, and I was wrestling every day, and I was not as heavy. So they had this assault course set up. It was Army Barracks. That's why they did it there. And and that was the first thing they had you do before they even looked at you, had you talk, anything like that. That they made you do this thing. And there was 50 of us there, and they cut 25 right out of the chute, like whoever, and just based on your time. Mm-hmm. So right out of the chute, like they put us through this, hellish like obstacle course. And there was a couple of my mates were at that audition with me. So we went down together, and we just were like, let's go and have a laugh. But we didn't take it seriously. Like I honestly thought I was too young. I was like, they'll never pick me. I'm like, I knew enough to know I'm still like a bit of a kid. I still look kind of young. I don't think I'm going to get the part, but whatever, It'd be fun. And you never know who you might meet. But okay. So we just went for it. But, I think I was in the top 10, I think, as far as the assault course goes at the time. Cause like I said, my cardio was, was great then. And I just remember that they read off this list of names, and I wasn't on the list of names and I remember thinking, well, never mind. And then they said, okay, if we just read your name out, thanks for coming, but we're not interested, go home. And suddenly, you're looking around, and then you start sort of, doing the probability, and and I started going, well, now there's 25 of us and there's 6 spots. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit better than a 1 in 5 chance. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll, maybe I was being hard on myself, And then they we take a little break. Everyone be back here at whatever time. And we come back. First thing they do, they bust the camera out. And I used to hear about this. See, the funny thing, a lot of my friends had been to WWE tryouts, and I'd never got one. But a lot of my friends had told me that WWE would do this, where like they'd be sitting around like, and then they would just get a camera out and put it in your face and go, cut a promo, get now, talk, right?
Wow.
So I think subconsciously in my mind, I'd sort of thought about that, because that's what they did at the Gladiators auditions. They busted out these cameras and suddenly went, okay, like, give us your best, like 30 seconds, you know, boom, whatever. And, you know, you're looking at all these guys and they're like meatheads. These guys are great shape. I recognize a lot of them from like fitness magazines and TV shows and stuff, but they just couldn't do this. They were like, you know, whatever, you know, and because then they, you know, you can see the producers kind of going, thanks, great, okay, next, you know. I just had like I said, I was on the holiday camps, so
That's your bread and butter.
On any given night, they might say, okay, you're a villain tonight, like go out and, you know, get some heat on the microphone first and then whatever. So I had, you know, at least 3 or 4 different like generic promos that I could just, you know, just pull out right away. And, you know, it was just very pro wrestling 101, right? You know, so like when I look at the teeth on this guy and the hair on that guy and, you know, whatever, right? Like, but in comparison to everyone else at the auditions, it was, you know, it was much better. And so then I saw a couple of the producers sort of go, like, make a couple of notes. So then I started going, okay, I might have a shot here, you know. And then they had everyone they set up like a sort of mock entranceway, like a tunnel. And again, didn't tell anyone what, but I knew what they were doing. But a lot of the guys had no clue what they were doing. And they said, okay, everyone line up. We're going to play some music. Give us your best entrance. Same thing. Some of these guys come out and they're just like deer in the headlights, like, you know, like flexing and stuff. And it's like, wah, wah. And I just, like I'm about 10 people deep. So I've got about 30 seconds to make a decision on what I'm going to do. I see a bottle of water lying on the ground, grab the bottle of water and do the fucking DX. Spit a bunch of water, like do some sort of spin, you know, point at a camera, like, you know, bow out, and that was it. Like I knew then, like, I fucking got this, because I watched a couple of producers go like, right, you know, like that's the sort of thing, you know, and that was, I don't think because, you know, at the time I wasn't that physically, I didn't have the physique I have now. You know, I did, because I was young. I was only 20. Like I hadn't really filled out yet, but I had enough of one. And I think that they looked at me and sort of went, whatever. But then it was all everything, the extra stuff behind that. Yeah. And I got the gig, but it was like, and it was then when I did the show, I remember we were training for it and everything. And I looked around, and again, like everyone, Dwayne Ladagio was on that show with us. Dwayne was a fucking Olympic silver medalist, you know, ridiculous athlete. He's a full-grown man, right? Like could dunk a basketball, you know, and like deadlift like 500 pounds. I mean, he's just like a freak of nature athlete and one of the sweetest guys ever. I love Dwayne. But I'm sort of looking around and like, and then, you know, all these other guys, like full-grown men in their like at least mid-20s, but some were even in their 30s and 40s. And I'm like a kid. And I remember looking around thinking, like, I've got to make the most of this opportunity, but I'm not going to like, I can't compete physically, but I can compete on the entertainment side. And I remember them getting everyone together one day. It was so funny because it just shows that how I looked at it compared to how they looked at it. But the producers got all the cast together. And it was very somber. Like they were sort of like, okay, guys, we've got something serious we need to talk about. And we thought, oh God, here we go. It's gonna be like drug testing or something, whatever. And they go, so as you know, Gladiators, it's not just about the physical stuff. It's about the characters and everything like that. And we've given you all your names. Like they gave us our names, but they said, we haven't really discussed your personas yet or anything. But we want you guys to discuss it amongst yourselves, but one of you needs to be a bad guy, right? And you would have thought that they would ask these guys for a kidney. Like, they were looking at, and I stood there. I thought everyone was going to be like, me, like, please make me.
Yeah.
And no one did. Everyone was looking at it like, oh no, someone has to be a bad guy. And I went, yeah, I'll fucking
Absolutely.
do it. I'm like, yeah, please. Like, and they went, you want to do it? I went, fuck yeah, I want to do it. Like, of course I want to do it. Like, I can't understand how the rest of you don't. And I remember, and they were like, oh, well, that's a relief. That was easy. And I went, fuck yeah. I said, you got your villain right here. And we finished it. And then, like, all the other guys came over and, like, I remember one of the guys, Sam, I still talk to him today. We still have a group chat with all the gladiators. It's so cool. But I remember him coming up to me and being like, are you sure about this? I was like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, you have no idea what you just missed out on. And they were all so relieved, like, oh my God, I'm so glad. I don't want to be a bad guy. I don't want people to boo me or whatever. And I'm like, I want every fucker in the building to boo me.
Bring it.
And yeah, and but then it was, you know, within 2 or 3 episodes, like, they were all just like, of course, you know, because suddenly I had my own. They ran an advert for Gladiators on Sky One that was just me. Like, I remember watching The Simpsons one day, and this, because I would see adverts for the show and I would sort of, you know, get a bit of a kick out of it, or whatever. And then this one came on, and it was kind of typical British television producer, like, corny, like, they played Bad to the Bone, you know, and it's down now, and it's like a close up of me, and then it's, you know, he's mad, he's bad, get used to it. But I was like, I remember sitting there with my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, what is this? It's just me. And that was it. And then it was like, Gladiators this Sunday on Sky One. I was like, oh shit, like, they made a whole commercial just with me, you know. That's when I knew, okay, it must be resonating. And that was how that was my, I always wanted to come to America. That was my ticket. Do you know what I mean? It was, I never looked at Gladiators as like, this was going to be this long-term thing. I never looked at it as a career. You know, I did panto off it. Fucking loved panto. I made some really nice money doing, like, appearances and stuff, like going to, like, shopping malls and playing Jewel on an inflatable bouncy castle. You know, I did, like, great, like, had a fucking blast. But I never looked at it as a sort of, this is my thing. I always had one eye on wrestling still. And I was like, how can I use this to help me with wrestling? And then, so there's 2 versions of this story, and to this day I'm not sure which one I believe, or whether maybe they're both right. But so FSM was the #1 magazine then, you know, Fighting Spirit magazine was the sort of #1 independent magazine, and James Denton, who was the editor at the time, is still a good buddy of mine. He reached out to me about an interview, and I was like, fuck yeah, you know, I'd love to. Obviously, because I went from being a nobody independent wrestler, and suddenly I was on, like, you know, double-decker buses and billboards and, you know, all over the country, and, you know, had my own commercial. So I'm only saying this because it's true, but it was really hard to nail down a time, because I was getting pulled in 10 different directions all the time between, like, filming and appearances. I was always on the train to London. And I had a BlackBerry, you know, so that's how long ago it was, kids. I had a BlackBerry, see? But it wasn't like now where you still had to sort of be online, you know. It wasn't as, you could sort of email on a phone, but that, you know, you couldn't do, it was, you know what I mean? We weren't quite there yet with like smartphones and stuff. It wasn't quite like it, we weren't sort of accessible anywhere in the world anytime. And we were finding it really hard to nail down a time to sit down and do, like, a long form interview. So in the end, I said, why don't you email me the questions and I'll write, and I'll just email you back with the answers. I said, that way you can sort of have a look at my writing style, because I wouldn't mind, if you were open to it, I wouldn't mind contributing to the magazine. And he was like, are you kidding? I'd love that. He's like, here, I'll pay you and you can have a column. And I had a column in FSM for 10 years or something. It was, I had a long running column. I ended up being the longest running columnist in the magazine before it shut down. And but the magazine that they did the big feature on me in was the first. Had AJ Styles was on the cover, and it was significant because it was the first time that someone on the cover had been someone who wasn't in WWE. Okay. It was the first non-WWE guy on the cover. It was AJ, and obviously TNA with keeping an eye on all the UK stuff, and Dixie with her background in PR. That's what she, that was her business before she went to TNA. She was in the PR business, so she was paying close attention. So she was making a big deal about this, and so she had a copy in the office and said to everyone, "Look, this is how well we're doing in the UK. Like AJ Styles is on the cover this month. It's the first time they haven't had a WWE guy on the cover." And just because of that, that's how that magazine ended up being like kicking around in the office in Nashville. And, so then inevitably they find this and they're like, oh shit, like they gave this guy 8 pages. Like, who's this guy? You know what I mean? And so then James, I was on holiday in Canada visiting I have family in British Columbia. So I was on holiday in Vancouver, and I got an email from James going, "This is really random, but Dixie Carter wants your contact information. Can I give it to her?" And I was like, yes. Like, but Dixie, the owner of TNA, Dixie? And he's like, yeah. And like, I have to give her credit for like cutting out the middleman, because 5 minutes later, I had an email from her saying, "Hi, Nick, I'm Dixie Carter. I'm the owner and president of TNA. I would love to give you a call. I'd love to know if you're interested in coming to work for TNA."
Wow.
And I just, you know what I mean? Like, it just completely, very spoiled in that respect, because I didn't have to have a tryout. I didn't have to, I didn't have to send in. Now, I remember thinking, like, do you want me to send in a match or something for you to, And I just got back right away and called her and said, "Oh, yes, of course. Like, I can't believe this. What do you have in mind?" And she's like, "Well, when can you start?" And I sort of went, "Well, I sort of have Panto, and I have like this. We've already committed to another season of the show and everything, but that ends in January." She's like, "Oh, perfect. We do a UK tour in January, so you can start on the UK tour, and then you can come back with the team and start on TV." And I just went like, "What? Like, this was like September, like."
So within literally a few months, just not even any time to blink.
And I just went, okay, like, I guess I wrestle for TNA now. And Terry Taylor sort of followed up and was like, and "Hey, I'm Terry Taylor." I was like, "Yeah, I know who you are." Like, and he's like, "Yeah, here, we're gonna send you, we're gonna draw up a contract and send it through, and just sign it and send it back." And then they said, and they were like, "Oh, when do you have any when's your next available time that you had like 3 or 4 like 3 or 4 days that you could come out to Nashville?" And I was like, I don't know, but it was relatively soon. And they're like, "Great, we want you to fly out to Nashville to do vignettes." I remember thinking, like, I've got vignettes. Like, why do I have vignettes? Do you know what I mean? I'm like, it's kind of like, I'm getting like, they're really sort of, I just thought I would show up and maybe, do dark matches first and whatever. And they were like, "No, we want you to come and do vignettes." Like, and so they flew me out to Nashville, and I got a tour of the office, and like,
wow,
did the whole, it was really, so, Dixie that's why I always, let people say a lot about Dixie, and some of it is true and some of it isn't. But as you can imagine, I have a great deal of fondness for her, for what she did for me.
Absolutely.
Because, I certainly didn't deserve that amount of, rolling out the red carpet and everything. But, I do take pride in the fact that I didn't let her down, in the long run, because I had, because it took a little while, but I ended up, sort of fulfilling my potential there and getting all the way to the main event and the world title and everything. So, yeah, but none of that would have happened without her.
Beautiful. That's a lovely story, a really nice way to lead into kind of the one of the last questions. So we usually ask, do you have any advice for someone wanting to get into wrestling? And listening to the journey that you've had to get there has been incredible. And everyone has their kind of own different story and experiences and ways of getting into that. Is there anything that you could offer in terms of advice to young or older aspiring kind of wrestlers that want to make it or try to?
Well, there's all kinds of stuff. And I'm sure some of it will finish this conversation and then I'll go, I should have said that. But you never know who you meet, right? Like, I know it's a very cliched one, but you never know who you might meet, and you never know who you're talking to at that given time and who they might end up becoming. So tread carefully, you know. And this is advice that I have not always taken. I will clarify that, you know, like there have been times where I've been an angry young man, you know, and been too emotional and reacted, you know, in the wrong way to certain things. And I probably have, you know, soured relationships that I shouldn't have soured, you know, and, you know, you pay the price for that. Just for me, I think remember, it's always treat it like a business. It is a business, right? You are a business. If you were in any other line of work as an independent contractor, plumber, electrician, you know, bricklayer, you know, would you accept the proposals that were being given to you? Would they make sense for you as a business, you know? And also remember that tomorrow's another day, you know, like pick your battles. Again, something I have not always done well. Pick your battles and understand that ultimately your value will be determined by the quality of your performance. That's not to say that booking isn't important, because it is. And it drives me crazy when you get people that say wins and losses don't matter. They do. It's the way you win and the way you lose. So that comes down to, you know, your again, the quality of your performance. But it's when you're first getting into the business, you know, just execute the fundamentals as perfectly as you can and then progress. Like, I can tell you, and this is not me being a, you know, old man yells at cloud. I'm 35. But because I do pay-per-views and I do TV tapings, but I also do independent shows and stuff as well. And a lot of the time I'll be, you know, the whole business has changed now, where that, you know, on any given show, there's likely to be sort of 3 or 4 name guys on it most of the time. Like, I was on these shows in Canada, the Bollywood boys were there, you know, different guys. And obviously me and Harry Smith and different people. So like, and whenever when we sit around and you'll get young guys who will come and say, oh, could you watch my match? Or did you see my match? What do you think? Or can you give me advice, whatever. You know, it's almost always the same thing where I'll go, we would much rather enjoy watching 2 young guys, if they've got 8 minutes, go and do a really well executed hairlock tackle, drop down, hip toss, you know, ducks and cross body, boom, 1, 2, kick it, you know, whatever it is. We'd much rather watch guys do this really nicely executed fundamentals, right? Crisp and you know, well timed and with some fucking pizzazz, you know, and some you know, panache, right? Then hold my hand and I'll climb up the ropes and I'll, you know, like, and it's not done. It's not, you know, it's not perfect, right? I always thought that this was something that I heard a lot from the veterans in Britain, was like, they used to call it the craft. And that's what you have to, I think you should approach the business like a craftsman. I think you should, like, you know, there are sushi chefs in Japan who aren't allowed to touch the fish for the first year, right? All they're allowed to do is the rice, you know. And I mean, I'm just using this as I don't know exactly how I don't want someone to go, actually, what are they doing? But you know what I'm saying? Because until they have mastered the rice, it is not relevant what they can do with the fish, because there is someone else who can do the fish. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Who the fuck gives a shit what you can do with the fish if you haven't got the rice right, then it's all going to go to shit.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true with wrestling. And you know, I use the sous chef comparison analogy quite a lot in wrestling, because it's, to me, it's sort of how I look at it. You know, is like I say, as a craft. Who, you know, the audience don't want to see you try stuff. The audience want to pay to see you do, like, professionally execute the stuff you've mastered.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is a hip toss, then give it the biggest fucking best hip toss you can possibly give, and take the biggest hip toss you can take, and bounce off the mat, and, you know, fly up and sell, and, you know what I mean, and attack the mat the next time you get bumped down, instead of like kind of half-ass doing all that because you really want to get a code red in, or a Canadian destroyer, or, you know, or something else. There is time for that. And, you know, like I said, approaching it like a business, what is your thing, right, in the marketplace? Not what's your thing, like, you know, I've come up with this name for myself, you know, okay, cool, right? I know that's all important, but who are you? You know, like, are you a guy just following the fashions, right? Like, there's cool move, like I see it all the time. Like, I'll see a bunch of moves and I'll go, when did everyone start doing this? You know, because everyone starts doing it, right? Like, one person, usually in Japan, one person does some sort of move and suddenly everyone's doing it, and most people aren't doing very well, you know, and you sort of go like, is this you, or is this you trying to fit in? Because, you know, fitting in is overrated, because in this business, you're supposed to stand out. I have been able to maintain a pretty good standard of living. And I think part of that was, like I said, when I came out of TNA, I sort of had this sort of arrogant, like, oh, I'm resting on my laurels, like, oh, I'll be fine, you know, because I had all this time on TNA TV and whatever. But, like, people weren't interested because they were like, well, who the fuck are you? You know, like, not who are you as like, we know who you are, but like, what's special about you? You know, like, what is your thing, right? But now I think when people think of me, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can correct me if I am, but it's like, my thing now is I feel like people look at me as like, he represents a certain sort of style of a, like, traditional, you know, I can work with anyone, but it's like, I deliberately stay away from certain stuff, because I go, you don't want to see that from me. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to see me do a Canadian destroyer, right? Like, well, I might take one, you know, but you're not going to see me give one, because that ain't who, you know, you didn't pay to, you know, if you paid to see me, that isn't what you paid to see. Like, you paid to see a story told, you paid to see the, you know, the wrestling, the match be presented in a way, and, you know, and wrestling be presented in a way that is authentic and credible. And, you know, that is a, like, I take, you know, people use the word throwback, and I take it as a big compliment. Because to me, like, good wrestling is good wrestling. Like, you know, Brett and other members of the Hart family said that to me. They go, you know, they said, you know, prime rib will always be prime rib. You know, that people, you know, people's taste in burgers and stuff might change. They might throw different, but, you know, but prime rib will always be prime rib. And, you know, they were talking about the match with me and Harry, you know, and I that was a beautiful compliment. So yeah, like, sometimes it's easy to get lost in trying to be one of the boys, or trying to fit in, or trying to impress people. Like, I see a lot of wrestlers who I think, are you trying to make money, or are you trying to impress the right people? Right. And sometimes those two go hand in hand, but sometimes you can get so wrapped up in trying to impress the internet or, you know, or like the most discerning of fans, that you can lose sight of the fact that, you know, you need to build your market value. Like, ultimately what it comes down to is make yourself as valuable as possible, so that you could either become desirable as someone to get signed to a nice contract, but if you're not, you can still make money. You know, that comes, you build your market value, build a professional reputation with promoters, your fellow wrestlers, and with the audience, where people know that every time I've bought a ticket and to see him, every time I've seen a show and he's been on it, I got my money's worth. You know, I never watched it and thought, it was disappointing. Doesn't mean to say you have to kill yourself every time, but like, make that commitment to yourself and to the business that people will always feel like they got their money's worth. And if you start there with everything you do, you'll be okay.
Sound advice. Really, really good.
A testament to that, actually. I was just thinking about it when you were talking about it, especially with the storyline stuff, is the match you had. I want to say it was at Hard Times with James Storm, where you did like, it reminded me a lot of Brett versus Piper, where it was kind of like a lot of shades of grey.
Yeah.
And that for me, that was like the match where I was like, kind of like, really like, oh yeah, this guy's awesome. This guy's really good. Because you didn't do anything that was like massively like outrageous. It was just a traditional wrestling match, but it told such a good story.
Yeah, I think, and this is something I learned from Brett, was like, and Nick Bockwinkel, that's a comparison that I've been getting more and more, and I really, really appreciate it when people make it, you know. So trust me, it's not lost on me when people make that comparison, because it means a hell of a lot, because I thought Bockwinkel was fucking awesome. But there's an art to being a wrestling champion, right? Like, there's a heel. I love being a heel. I'm infinitely better at being a heel. You know, I understand that, and I love doing it. And that's one of the things I loved about the match in Calgary last week, was that because I've been a babyface in the NWA for ages, and it's stifling to me, because I'm like, ugh, you know, I like controlling people's emotions. And but when, you know, and it was cool for me because I wasn't a champion. Like, I didn't have, because you have to wrestle in a certain way when you're the world champion. I think, you know, you have to put in more, you have to have more commitment to, you know, to everything you do. And there's a way to wrestle as a champion that, you know, if you want to hold the belt for a long time, like, there are certain guys who lend themselves well to chasing titles, and there are certain guys who lend themselves well to holding titles. And I've always tried to model myself after Bockwinkel, Flair, Harley, Triple H, Brett. All of those guys I just listed, I thought were really good long-term champions, because they were very good at getting the most out of very little, and just giving a little bit more each time, not just throwing the kitchen sink at the first title match. You know, shine up the other guy. Like, control the situation, control the pace, control the tempo, control the emotion, most importantly. And that's how you get the absolute most out of the guy you work with. And you let the people go, man, he should be champion, you know. But then but suddenly, and you know, suddenly they don't realize it, but subconsciously, the next time you defend the title, they're there again, you know, because, and it takes courage to be that guy. Like, people for years kind of had this thing on Triple H, like, well, he was just the guy that worked with the top guys. I heard that criticism a lot, and it's like, yeah, because someone had to. Someone had to have the courage to be, I don't want to be, you know, like everyone else, I want to be cool. I want to have a cool cat. I want to be the big star. I want everyone to cheer for me. It's kind of like going back to like the Gladiators thing, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas like someone has to have the business acumen, you know, and the sense of responsibility to go, well, not everyone can be the hero. You know, someone's got to be the antagonist. and I've always tried to be the sort of the best antagonist that I can be, the great antagonist.
Absolutely. Just before we start like kind of like wrapping up as well, we've just kind of like started working with you with your legacy sports nutrition brand.
Yeah.
What inspired you to create that business, and what can you tell us about the product in general from it?
Well, like I alluded to earlier, when I first sort of developed this passion for wrestling, it paralleled with this passion that I was developing for getting in shape, for health and fitness and nutrition and everything. So I would get all the magazines, and I would get the Arnold books and the Dorian Yates book, and all different stuff. And so over the years, I've used all kinds of supplements. Always been on point with my supplement, regimen and everything. And over time, started sort of formulating the idea a few years ago. I was like, what, with the platform and when I'd been featured in Muscle and Fitness a couple of times, and Men's Health and different things. I thought, I would like to launch a brand at some point, especially for like products that I would want. And honestly, when lockdown happened and the pandemic, that was when I went, okay, like I've got enough time, and I can actually, do the research and get everything going, and, find the suppliers, and, get everything going. And we did. And, it's my baby, there's no doubt, but Mickey there's a women's line, and Mickey's involved in it, and so we run the business, together. And one of the things, like, that was one of the reasons why I launched one of the first products we launched with, which is still one of our best sellers. In fact, we only launched the brand with 5 products, and 2 of those 5 are our best sellers now. And it's still bestsellers, like, by a long way. And that's Test X9 and Recovery PM. The Recovery PM, I'd become this, I think maybe, I'm sure because of wrestling, because of all the travel and going in different time zones and being exhausted, but then, then having to peak late at night on show days, but then coming home and being dad, and then being like, I got to be up at 6 o'clock to get breakfast going and get my son off to school. Sleep is so important. Like, it's a pillar of health. And when you're young, you just don't give a shit about sleep. Like, it happens, and you sort of like, and when you don't have any responsibilities, you take it for granted, because you can pretty much sleep as long as you want, unless, if you got a job and you got to make, you got to be to work on time and all that sort of thing. But for the most part, you don't. I found that when I became a parent was when I really started to get serious about, like, how important sleep is to your health. Like, most people in the Western world, I can't speak for the whole world, but most people in, like, the UK and the US, a lot of the health problems that people have, and just overall sort of wellness, like performance issues that people have, most of them could be diminished, or at least significantly improved, by improving their sleep. And I'm not just talking about being more alert and, feeling better, literally talking about mental health, which obviously is a huge thing now. People are much more discussion about, which is a great thing. But a lot of people's mental health issues are coming from poor quality sleep, because their brain is not rested enough, and the brain isn't getting a chance to recuperate. It's not getting a chance to produce enough dopamine, or it's becoming addicted to dopamine from artificial sources like, phones and social media, mindless entertainment, etc., etc. And for men, the majority of your testosterone release occurs while you're asleep, and it has to be during a certain type of sleep. It has to be during a deep sleep. You have to be in a good state of REM sleep for a good period of time for testosterone to release. So again, when I started putting together the Test X9, It was like all of the ingredients in Test X9, and you can go to the website, legacysups.com. One of the things that I take pride in is that on the Test X9 page, you can read the product description, and there's links to all of the products, and they all link to independent clinical studies that show the effectiveness of these different ingredients, right? And they're not something that I've done. But it occurred to me that, well, everyone, test boosters are really popular now, and as they should be, because most guys, the testosterone levels drop after the sort of mid-20s. But not everyone wants to go to a clinic and get TRT, because the thing is with TRT is once you pull that pin and that grenade, it's over. Like once you start getting artificial testosterone, like you have to keep going and getting artificial testosterone, right? So you really want to try your best to do anything you can to stimulate your own natural T levels before you mess around with that. And that's when I realized, well, most guys should be taking both of these. They should be taking the test booster and the sleep aid, which is why the Ultimate Test Stack has that and the estrogen blocker as well. Because it's like, here's, if you're working out and you're taking care of yourself and you're eating a decent diet with some good healthy fats and stuff and some good animal protein and everything like that, even if you're not, if you're vegan, making sure that you're getting those nutrients from elsewhere, and you're taking these and you're getting a good night's sleep, like you will see some benefit. And so we sort of focused on that first, and we had great feedback. Like we had guy ranging from wrestlers all the way to guys who work out a couple of times a week to people who don't even work out and who are starting to who are just thinking about it, or just sort of who have, they not work out per se, but they do other active things, but they went, I feel like my testosterone is low, or I wanted better sleep. And the feedback for Recovery PM especially was really great. And so sort of off the back of that, off the success of that, we then expanded and had, got to more products. And I think we're up to 30 products now. And yeah, we focused on the wrestling audience, because that's where we obviously had credibility. And, Conan and his show has been a great partner for us. Conrad has been a great partner for us, and different guys. So, and now we're starting to reach out because we know there are so many more podcasts that have good, dedicated fan bases who trust you. And we're out here going, look, we're not trying to sell you on this. We're not trying to make these, we don't do before and after, not to say that we never will, but we're not like those sort of generic kind of ads that you would see a lot of the time. Like, oh, I lost 1 million pounds, like we're getting genuine feedback. Like on the site, we have links to the reviews. It's on top rated. So it's verified as independence. There's no manufactured reviews. And these are all from genuine people who have been like, you know what? I heard him talk about it. I tried it and I really liked it. And, James, I know I've sent a couple of bottles of Recovery PM to you, so I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on it. Genuine feedback.
I'm looking forward to trying it. For me, like when you're saying about like the late nights, so I spent like probably about better part of a decade working in a bar, so like my sleep's always been kind of all over the place. And now currently, but not for too much longer, I'm doing shift work, so again, it's all over the place. So
yeah,
I feel like something for that for me would work wonders. So I'm really looking forward.
I would suggest that when you get it, I would just like whenever you like try to take it about an hour before you want to be asleep.
Yeah.
Like, I always leave it on my nightstand. And so sometimes I forget and I just and I chuck them down when I go to bed. But ideally, especially if you're in a sort of, if your pattern's changing a lot and your circadian rhythm is getting disrupted, that I would suggest like try to make a habit, even if it just means setting a little reminder or something and being like, all right, take it now because I want to be asleep by such and such a time, and this will help sort of kick in. Because the thing with Recovery PM, and I don't want to make this into like an infomercial, but it's most, people buy melatonin and melatonin works, right? the problem with melatonin is if you can't switch off mentally, if you can't actually kind of stop, if you can't, you stop your brain from buzzing, melatonin just makes you irritable because now your body's trying to sleep, but you're still like wired, and it can end up being very frustrating and irritable. With Recovery PM, it's like we have a blend of natural tranquilizers as well, like 5-HTP and GABA and stuff like that, and L-tryptophan, to help you actually relax as well. So it's kind of like the first wave of stuff helps come in and sort of actually chill you out a bit, and then once you're able to, and then then the melatonin kicks in, and you can hopefully get into a deep sleep. I need to do it more consistently because I have Mickey got me one of those wrist, the watch things, I think it's the Amazon one, but I'm not consistent enough with it, but it does track your sleep. So I'm going to actually do my own study on it, and I'm going to do like a week without Recovery PM and get all the data, and then I'm going to do a week with it, and I'm going to publish it, to show, because I believe in the products. Like it's a very simple philosophy, but we use the stuff ourselves. Like we wouldn't sell stuff that we don't use, and again, it's just one of those things where I went, well, I use supplements all the time, so if I would use it, then I feel like we're in a pretty good spot, and we do, and we like the results we get from it.
Awesome. And finally, before we have like a little quick fire round we'll do at the end. What are your goals for 2023 and beyond, both within wrestling and with your supplement brand as well?
Well, with the business, it's to just keep scaling. Obviously, I won't bore people with my sort of specific targets, but we have different targets for a number of subscribers and sales and stuff like that. But we scaling. We're very much focused on our direct to consumer model, but we have had some inquiries from some retailers. So that's sort of an interesting avenue to sort of be looking at, maybe getting some wholesale contracts and stuff. But the supplement business is hard. It's very regulated, and there's a lot of red tape. And a lot of the time, I'll be honest, the amount of hoops you have to jump through ends up making me just go, I just want to sell directly to customers like this. I can't deal with all this bullshit. Mm-hmm. But if I can, if we'll reach a point where someone will make us an offer we can't refuse, and then we'll have to deal with it. And, I'll pay someone to deal with all that shit. But as far as wrestling, I do have aspirations now to sort of to move on and level up. I think I feel like I'm really sort of peaking, and I really feel like I'm at this sort of point where I can offer a lot to whoever it is I end up working with. And so I'm very much interested in just sort of playing the field and seeing what opportunities come up now, because I feel like I've done everything I can do at the NWA. And I'm very proud of what I've done, but I'm also open to the idea that I could be doing more. There's more out there, and I'm interested to explore those opportunities.
Nice. Obviously, very interesting seeing where that goes, and all the best with that. Shall we move on to our quick fire questions?
Let's do it.
Go on. Dream, it's 60 seconds, and we'll try and fit into 60 seconds, but we've had a few people on that have taken
never lasts
20 minutes. It
goes longer.
So quick fire round, 60 seconds. Dream match opponent, dead or alive?
Bret Hart.
Fantastic. Dream tag partner?
Oh, maybe Shawn Michaels.
Nice. Favorite pay-per-view?
Backlash 2000.
I knew you were going to say that. Favorite match?
Of mine? Or
favorite
watch.
match? To watch of someone else.
Brett and Mr. Perfect, King of the Ring '93.
Oh, yes, please. The Rock or Stone Cold?
Rock.
Yeah. Sting or Undertaker? Oh, do you want to change your mind?
Just no. It is, but it's just a preference thing. It's not,
Yeah.
Steve Austin's he's the greatest ever, and no one's ever going to touch him in terms of the business he did.
Fair. Sting or the Undertaker?
Undertaker.
Okay.
I love Stinger, but the Taker's he's
iconic.
The reaction that he was able to get for his entire run, it was just incredible.
Yeah, I agree. NWO or DX?
DX.
Edge
I always thought DX was cool, and I thought NWO was cool to begin with, and then very quickly I lost interest in it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Edge or Christian?
Edge.
Best entrance song, favorite entrance song?
Probably Brett's. I always
Nice.
loved Brett's music.
Yeah, good shout. What? Next one. This Brett or Sean?
Brett.
Okay.
But again, just because of its relevance to me.
Of course. Yeah.
Sean is I think it's virtually, I know it's obviously everything's subjective, but I don't really think it's arguable that Shawn Michaels is the greatest in-ring performer the industry's ever had.
Yeah. So the last one, and here's your chance to put some of those in a prominent position. Your Mount Rushmore of wrestling, your personal Mount Rushmore. I feel like you've mentioned probably 3 of them already just here.
Hogan, Flair, Brett, and Steve Austin.
Nice.
I'm just trying to think of, and look, Mount Rushmore is hard because you're asking for 4, and there's all sorts of criteria, but in terms of wrestling as pertains to what wrestling means to me, and the wrestling that I was exposed to, right? Like, had it not been for those people, like, would I be in the wrestling business? The answer is probably no. And I think that from obviously, Andre, right? Like Andre the Giant is sort of like, an Undertaker. Like, you have these guys who are sort of who often, I think, are not necessarily praised enough for just how important they were, like how big a stars they were, right? Like how much of a draw they were, because they were so constant. Like Undertaker was such a consistently huge draw, and that it's almost like that it almost gets taken for granted. Andre the Giant was such a consistently huge draw that it gets taken for granted, because people are going like, well, who's the champion and how are they drawing? And it's like, but Ric Flair, in terms of his economic impact on the wrestling business, when Vince McMahon went national and took over wrestling, and basically took over the majority of took all the major stars and launched this juggernaut with Hulk Hogan, and essentially just sped away as this whole different level of business in wrestling. Ric Flair carried the rest of the wrestling business on his back. Traveled from all over the world and busted his ass to make so many people valuable. I don't think anyone in history has ever been responsible for more guys becoming a draw in their own right than Ric Flair, because, and it's a lot of it was on a smaller scale than the WWF, but Rick would go from place to place and would, you know, make some of the most nominal guys to the point where for a while that promoter could then continue to do good business with whoever it was who Ric Flair wrestled. That is an incredible responsibility and an incredible accomplishment that, like, people, you know, a lot of wrestlers owe a lot to Ric Flair, like for how generous he was and how much he contributed to the wrestling economy. Hulk Hogan, you know, had a tremendous impact on the wrestling economy also in a different way, you know, but that's why I would put those two on it. And then Steve Austin, you know, as a financial success, you'll never top what Steve Austin did. Like, because I think the model has changed at this point. No one will ever top what Steve Austin did in terms of proportion of money generated for one person, you know, in a period of time, in proportion to what the overall, you know, business was generating and the overall, you know, promotion was generating. No one will ever touch Steve Austin. Mm-hmm. And Bret Hart, I think, represents the best wrestling champion of the modern era. And again, I sort of look at it beyond the surface of, you know, the biggest star or drew the most money. But Bret, I think, carried the WWF on his back in the 1990s. Not alone, but certainly carried the majority of the weight, him and Undertaker, and then Shawn. But like Bret in Europe and in, you know, internationally, Bret pulled the wagon. Like, so for me, the Mount Rushmore is the guys who pulled the wagon. And they're the four guys to me, you know, and props to Cena in the modern era. Like, you know, he did too, different circumstances, but like those guys for me, I admire them so much because they pulled the wagon.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you very much for your time today. This has been a really awesome chat we've had. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to plug? Obviously, I can see there's a specific action figure next to you there.
Yes.
Keeps drawing me eye.
Mickey's retro style action figure. It's based on the outfit that she wore when she did the Royal Rumble and her historic Royal Rumble appearance. That's they're available for pre-order now at figuremania.net. Figuremania.net, and you can pre-order that. We ship worldwide, and they are pressed and they are made and they are en route. So if you pre-order now, you shouldn't have to wait too long. But it's a limited run, so get your hands on a limited collectible at figuremania.net, and Mickey will sign it. There's different packages available where you can get a signed one, and we've got like limited edition trading card that goes with it, and different packages. So you can do one with a video shout out, you know, all sorts of different options there at figuremania.net.
Awesome. Any plans for you to get one of your own?
Well, I had Mochella Toys ones, and some of these are on the back wall here.
Yeah,
nice.
That's sort of what I was the first Chella Toys figure, and it did so well that's sort of what that's when that's sort of what opened my eyes to the market, as far as like, oh well, I'm sure Mickey's would do well. And yeah, so that's how Figuremania came to be.
Nice.
But, we'll see how it goes, and then we'll potentially explore new ones after that.
Sweet. One thing we did forget to mention, actually, Jay, you said we, doing some work with Legacy Subs and stuff. For those interested in any of the products, we've got a discount code, an exclusive discount code. We get you 15% off if you use the discount code UWP. So head over to legacysubs.com and input the discount code UWP for 15% off all of the fantastic products, supplements, and whatnot, and more that we discussed on this show.
Yes, sir.
I'll be documenting now. I'm getting on our news podcast as well with the Recovery PM. So
Great.
to give a bit of a more personal approach to it.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, thanks again. Very grateful for your time. Where can people get you on social media if they want to follow you?
At Real Nick Aldis on Twitter and at Nick Aldis on Instagram. I'm verified on both. So, and I ain't had to pay for it.
We're still waiting for Az. I sent something off ages ago.
I said when I saw the thing with Elon Musk where he said people can pay, he's gonna make it available for people to pay to verify whatever. And I said
$8 a month.
I said it's only a matter of time before a wrestling promo where someone says I didn't have to pay for my blue check. Like that's just the sort of burn that you'd get in a wrestling promo nowadays, isn't it? Like I was verified and I didn't have to pay for it. Ooh, got him. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Nick, thank you again so much for your time. It's really appreciated.
No worries, boys.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. All the best.
Thanks.
Bye.